Imagine being headhunted to put your indie game on Steam. Or imagine being one simple action away from selling millions of copies. These aren't made up scenarios, these are real stories. I'm Big Dull, welcoming you to the Indie Dev Campfire. This is our little space where we share war tales from the world of indie game development together. This is a video that you can enjoy as a podcast or in the background while you work. So let's light up that campfire and hear the stories of three very special indie developers. It's the late 1980s, and we're in a small town near Rome in Italy. A young legend, who will be known as the Vampire Survivor one day, has just been born. Meet Luca, the mastermind behind the indie game sensation, Vampire Survivors. Luca, like most of us, grew up loving RPG and adventure games, and he was determined to make his own one day. This dream led to him pursuing programming in high school and university. After his degree, he'd eventually moved to London, but he struggled with the move. Finding work and adjusting to learning the language of a foreign country was tricky. This held him back in his pursuit to become a game developer, leading him to taking a job in McDonald's. But that didn't stop him pursuing his indie game dev dreams. The competitive nature of tech and programming jobs wasn't the only hurdle that Luca was facing. He also had the added challenge of attending interviews and selling his skills with limited English. Eventually, after working his fast food job for a while and continuing to work on his technical skills in English, Luca made the promise that he'd take the first programming job regardless of if it's in game development or not, and in Luca's words, he was even open to working a gambling related job. And don't you know it, the first job Luca found was gambling related. Little did Luca know that the skills he learned and the contacts he made while at this job would help him change not only his life, but the lives of thousands of people across the world. Luca continued to work at this company, working on games and fixing bugs mostly. Eventually he progressed and he found himself in a management position where he was working on games less, but instead he'd be completing paperwork and managing staff. He found himself in a position that many of us all have. He felt creatively stifled at his day job. Luca would switch working for different companies, but he still found himself craving a creative project outside of work. He practiced by working on an RPG, which seems to be a theme that many of us indie devs follow. Eventually, he'd start working on a simple prototype after spending an evening playing Magic Survival on his phone. He realised that it would be super simple to recreate the game using JavaScript. So he got to work building out a simple 2D world with a character that the player controls and enemies that would spawn and chase the player. Luca realised that usually at this point he'd stop working on the prototype, but this time it felt different. He wanted to continue fleshing the game out, adding more weapons and characters, and replacing the horrible programmer art consisting of coloured squares. So he found asset packs inspired by the Castlevania series and he added them to the prototype. And it was at this point Luca fell in love with the project. Seeing the game with functioning sprites was throwing fuel into his already burning desire to add tons and tons of content to the game. Luca toiled for months, adding weapons and effects to his game, adding whatever his gut told him to and what he thought would make the game even more fun. Eventually, getting to a stage where he felt the game was complete and he also thought the world was ready to see Vampire Survivors, he released it on itch.io. And he couldn't believe the reception that it got. Nobody gave a shit. And he was surprised. Quote him, he found it upsetting that not even a handful of people noticed it. He reached out to other game devs who used the Phaser engine in an effort to get some feedback, but still, nothing happened. Nobody cared. So his next thought was Steam. Maybe Vampire Survivors would get more coverage there. Luca went back to working on his indie game for another 5 months or so, and in December 2022, Vampire Survivors released on Steam. A few weeks after release, Vampire Survivors was covered by Splattercat Gaming on YouTube. This resulted in a sales spike on Steam. From there, Vampire Survivors grew and grew, eventually spawning its own subgenre and inspiring thousands of game developers across the world. This is a story of how one man's passion for creating games changed the entire landscape. Vampire Survivors shook not only the indie game dev world, but the entire game industry. And it was made by one guy, balancing his creative passion and unfulfilling day job. The story of Vampire Survivors is really one of the most remarkable and it's one of my most favourite indie releases over the last few years actually. But I think you're really going to like this next story as well. Just quickly though, if you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left it a little like. If you want to see more videos like this, comment below what you would like to see next, and even consider subscribing just so that you're alerted next time. It really helps me out big time. If you don't want to do that, no pressure guys. Let's get started with story number 2. Imagine this, it's 2017 and Adam, a software developer by trade, decides to leave his job and return to his hometown in Canada. His dream to build games full time. This was something that Adam had been dabbling with on itch.io by releasing small games for free. It was a hobby Adam enjoyed, but he wanted to take it to the next level. This is a tale of a bold decision, a tight deadline, and a game that resonated with hundreds of thousands of people all across the globe. This is the story of A Short Hike. A year after quitting his full-time job and Adam was deep into developing an ambitious RPG, Adam found himself lost without a clear vision however. The project was vast, and in Adam's own words, completion was still years away. In December 2018, Adam decided to take a brief respite from this colossal task. This decision would change his entire life as an indie game developer. During his break, Adam opened Unity, but not to work on his RPG, but to craft a small, calming world where he could escape to. This wasn't just another game project, it was a personal sanctuary. He let his creativity flow without constraints, building what felt right to his heart, and the result was a captivating, beautiful world which he shared screenshots of on Twitter, and this quickly caught the attention of fans, and more importantly, of funders. Now, Adam faced a crucial choice: continue the grueling development of his RPG, or pivot completely to this new, enchanting project that took merely a week to prototype. And with courage, Adam chose the path less travelled. He shelved his RPG. But this wasn't an easy decision, as Adam himself is quoted as saying that the sunk cost fallacy was continuously in his head with his RPG. Adam's technical background didn't lend itself well to sophisticated art. Instead of selling this as a limitation, he embraced it, completing simple 3D models and pixelating them, giving A Short Hike a unique, stylized aesthetic that invited players to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. This decision not only defined his game's charming look, but it also ensured that it could be completed within the tight 4-month deadline set by the Humble Bundle. Adam organised his game development process around 2 lists: core features, these were essential for launch, and stretch goals. These were features that would enhance the game, but only if time allowed it. This clear prioritisation helped him avoid the common trap of perfectionism, a significant hurdle for many developers. With years of hobbyist game development under his belt, Adam had a treasure trove of reusable code that streamlined the creation of A Short Hike. This repository of past projects allowed him to implement common features efficiently, significantly cutting down on development time. Adam met his April 2019 deadline, releasing A Short Hike to critical acclaim. Yet, he felt it could be improved, a sentiment familiar to many creators. And despite these feelings, the game launched on Steam a few months later, and as of May 2024, boasts 99% positive views from over 13,500 players. This, combined with an estimated 490,000 units sold, paints the picture of Adam's success. A Short Hike exemplifies how simplicity, focus, and a willingness to pivot can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Adam Robinson used Journey encourages all game developers to consider that sometimes providing a small but enriching experience can be more impactful than the most ambitious projects are. Before diving into indie sensation Papers, Please, it's worth exploring the early development days of its creator, Lucas Pope. Growing up with a knack for disassembling things due to his father's handyman skills, Pope found his true calling in the gritty world of Quake modding. This was the start of his journey, one which would see him become a legendary figure in the indie game dev space. Pope would team up with fellow Quake modders, where they'd start their own indie game studio, Ratloop Inc. They'd work with Activision and Nintendo briefly, but Pope would exit the indie game dev world in 2003 to take employment at various game dev studios. Eventually, Pope would land a job at Naughty Dog, working on a title that you may or may not have heard of before, Uncharted. And Pope would find himself indispensable on the team. Despite not holding a background in programming, Pope had a keen interest in working in user interfaces, and he was really good at it too. Really good. He was able to build user interfaces for Uncharted that would typically take multiple developers and designers, but he did this all on his own. And after the release of Uncharted, he'd continue on at Naughty Dog, building critical tools that would assist in level and UI design while working on Uncharted 2. After the release of Uncharted 2, Pope felt an itch. Something was calling him. He missed his indie game dev life. With his wife also being a game developer, the couple would team up to make several small indie games together, such as Mightier, a game which required you to print puzzles, draw on them, and then scan them with a webcam. After showing the project off, they were approached by Valve, who encouraged the pair to release the game on Steam for free. Mightier released on Steam in March 2009 and is still on Steam as of May 2024. What's amazing is that you can see some similarities in the graphics between Mightier and Papers, Please. But Pope and his wife decided to leave their full-time jobs as game developers in order to pursue the indie game dev dream. They would work on many small games together, eventually winning award for Best Mobile Game at the 2011 Independent Games Festival. Despite the critical acclaim, the game was performing poorly in terms of generating income. During the years where Pope chased the dream of becoming a successful indie developer, he'd travelled to Singapore, where he helped the team at Ratloop to port one of their games to PS3, and this is where the idea for Papers, Please first arose. Pope recalled the terrible hassle that he faced at immigration when travelling through Southeast Asia during this time, and this led him down a bit of a rabbit hole where he'd become fascinated with the process of checking immigration papers. He now had a solid idea for his next game, and he set to prototyping it. But there was a problem. At this time, Pope and his wife were living off of their savings, and they were also preparing to raise a family. All of a sudden, there was a sense of urgency. Pope promised that this next game would be his final indie game project before he'd have no money left and he'd have to find a job once again. With his indie game dev status on the line and a plan for his next game project, Pope got to work. He decided to keep a public development blog on the independent game source. Through these posts, he was able to collect feedback on the development of Papers, Please. He also kept a publicly available demo where anyone could try out the game and leave their critique. Pope was moulding a game around a mundane, repetitive job into an intense, emotional experience, but he knew he had to find a platform to distribute the game. And with it being 2013, you couldn't just pay $100 to get a Steam page. Instead, you had to navigate Steam Greenlight. You'd pay $100 to have Valve list your game on the Greenlight section of Steam, but you'd then need regular Steam users to vote for your game. Valve would then greenlight your game, allowing you to distribute it on Steam. Quite the far cry from how Steam works now. With all this in mind, Pope knew he had to get on Steam, but he had doubts that his game would get voted onto the platform by users due to its particularly niche appeal. He pressed ahead though, and $100 later, Papers, Please was on Steam Greenlight, and it only took a few days and a handful of YouTubers playing his public demo before Papers, Please was greenlit. This was a pivotal point in the journey. With his savings dwindling and a baby on the way, Pope saw the massive attention Papers, Please was getting on the independent game source and also on YouTube. He finally felt a sense of reassurance. He was onto something, and after being greenlit, Pope focused on redefining gameplay mechanics and addressing feedback he received from players trying out the demo. But he wasn't just tweaking mechanics and adjusting controls and even fixing bugs. Pope wanted to present impactful decision making, something that would make the player encounter moral and ethical dilemmas. Therefore, he needed to script a wide array of possibilities that could adapt dynamically based on the player's decision making. And Pope stated in interviews that this was a formidable task which took a lot of time and resources to develop. Each event had to account for multiple outcomes, which required a sophisticated understanding of branching narrative techniques. This pushed back the development timeline for Papers, Please quite a bit, going from 6 months to a 9-month development cycle. And after a tense development period, Papers, Please was released on Steam. The reception was nothing short of spectacular. Releasing in August 2013, Papers, Please has sold more than 5 million copies by 2023. Pope had struck gold and built a simple game with basic mechanics that made people fall in love with the emotional weight of their decisions. This prompted the porting of the game to iOS and PlayStation Vita, as well as spawning a short film adaptation which Pope himself co-wrote. From a risky indie project to a globally recognised title, Papers, Please stands as a testament to Lucas Pope's vision and determination to survive in the brutal world of indie game development. And it's a success story that serves as inspiration for us all, that as long as we have the grit and passion to make games, we've got the chance of striking indie game gold.